Welcome, adventure. I'm GM Goblin, your GM Goblin, and today we are going to go on a 3P adventure as we take a look at Legendary Games Ultimate Kineticist Compendium and their Legendary Kineticist. So stick around with me and let's go and see what exactly they changed, why they changed it. And if you have any issues or anything you want to add, go ahead, put them in the comments below. And don't forget, hit that like and subscribe button. All right, let's begin. Now, if you're a fan of the Kineticist, like I am, and I've had multiple videos that I've made or done a quick overview of some builds for some characters, then we're going to want to know either where they come from and what happened with them. Well, first, Kineticist came out in 2015, I think it was June, for the Occult Adventurers. This gave you a couple different classes. You're looking at the Mesmerist, the Occultist, some really cool ideas, and then you had Kineticist was so different than a lot of them. The Occultist is fairly different with a lot of things as well. But these classes don't get a whole lot of love. And so Occultist can be pretty cool. It's got a lot of spell mimicking effects and everything. But the Kineticist is very different with how they are built and how they work. And so because they never got love, they didn't get their own book, like in 2nd edition. They came out with, I think it was Rage of the Elements or something. So they are very limited and they didn't get any work done in any of the later editions. And so they're kind of a low tier class where they can do some really cool things. I just don't think it was expanded enough, or they don't get enough options. I mean, Kineticist Diadem is one of the few magical items you can get for it in actual Paizo official release stuff that's non-3P. And all it's doing is giving you a little bit extra damage to your blast. It's a great idea and a great function with the class of getting that all-day blaster that the Warlock in 5e has, the Warlock in previous editions had in 3.5. But you also get that bending the elements kind of feel, and I really like that. So I recommend people take in some of the 3P equipment that is out there, or the prints, the books. You have listened to any of my other Kineticist videos, you'll have heard me say Injolly. Injolly has a guide out that is specifically for, well, not specifically for, but it divides up the 3P content, and it has a complete section that is only for Paizo release. Recommend going with that if your GM's not going to let you pull in any of the other 3P content. If you're using 3P content, I do recommend going with Going Nova because it's a good guide regardless of which way you're going to go, but you don't have to look at something and then realize that it's 3P later on. A lot of it split up, but it's pretty good at laying things out. And he does a very good explanation of things that he thinks should be vetoed as a GM and a few things that might be a little overpowered. And so giving this or highlighting a few things from this might be a good thing if you're trying to get your GM, like I am, to allow you to use any of the 3P content. But Ultimate Kineticist came out in 2019. I believe Injolly had a little bit to do with this, and I've seen some of the creators from Legendary Games on the Paizo forum that have answered a lot of questions and a few things that they cleared up. But I think adding at least this, and there is also a couple other books as well as the 2nd edition for Ultimate Kineticist Compendium, I think it rounds out and gives the Kineticist a little more playability, a little more not just having to scrounge and pick up random magical items outside of your common 6. And not all of it, I don't think most of it is really overpowered. They did pretty well with balancing this in comparison to your other stuff. I mean, I have a 19th level wizard in the game, and even if I allow everything in all of these books, you're still not going to compare really in the brokenness that can be her. Now, I'm not saying that you can't deal damage with this. I played a Kineticist by rules, by Paizo rules in a campaign, and I was able to deal pretty good damage. I was able to deal pretty good damage because this race right here, the Gathlane, which is hands down, in my opinion, the best Kineticist that you're going to find. And really, you should be trading it in to a Treeborn for one of its ability. That way you don't get a penalty to your constitution, but it alters your speed, because this class 1 gets flight at the start, which is why it was vetoed for this coming mummy game. And the best thing about this class is right here, which allows you, when you're using the main ability to decrease burn, once every 6 levels, it's going to give you an extra point. This basically means by level 12, you have the ability to reduce the amount of damage you take by twice as much as, say, a human. And so just doing standard, it really is the best way to go. Now, I could get some blasts up into rounds where I was doing 168 points of damage. I think it was level 13 or 14, which is really good. But you're also hurting yourself the entire time you're doing this. And Constitution's your main ability, so you're going to have a large Constitution pool, but it is very painful. And if you have a GM that throws damage at you and 3/4 of your HP has now been used up so that you can damage the rest of the dungeon, you get hit with a breath weapon, you're just going to go unconscious. Quick overview of the Ultimate Kineticist Compendium. Now, the reason I said to go with this one is because this has a culmination of some previous work with Legendary, from Legendary Kineticist 2, and it pulls a class from there and it refines a little bit. Now, in my case, I don't believe I'm going to be looking at really any of the elements outside of what is in the basic game that was released in the Occult book, but this adds expansion to feats, class features, and outside of the normal Kineticist, it also gives you the Legendary Kineticist. Now, they list this as a variant class. So just kind of like with Unchained, you can take pretty much any of the archetypes and stuff, and there's specific archetypes this adds as well, which are pretty cool. And this changes several key mechanics. So your gather power and infusions and everything work pretty much the same way, keeping a lot of the same kind of all terminology. The biggest differences that you're going to be looking at with this is, one, your burn is different in this. So instead of taking 1 point of damage per level in non-lethal damage, you're going to take a point. Can I highlight this? Let's increase the size. Yeah. You're going to take a point of burn, which is going to be a -1 penalty to all strength and dex ability checks and skill checks. So, and this is except for initiative. And that is the biggest thing with this. Now, this is also one of the things that is very likely to get it not allowed by your GM, because one of the greatest drawbacks to a Kineticist is also one of its balancing mechanics, you losing that HP. Otherwise, you have your main power being coming from your Constitution. Well, now if I have a 25 or 30 Constitution, I have more HP than probably a fighter or two combined. I believe my character had close to 300 or about, whenever it was all done, and maybe more. Then you're looking at me having this, losing some checks. Well, this is not that big of a deal to me, having skill monkeys in the group, just wanting to fly around and cast my utilities and then blast. This is also going to be something that, like I said, may get it removed. I recommend, and I'm not the only one, changing this, if you're going to stick with the way it works now, back to doing burn like normal. And so that's going to make your GM far more likely to allow you to use it. One of the next things that changes is your battle burn, which you get 1 at level 4, and then level 11 you get 2, and then level 18 you get your 3rd one. Battle burn doesn't allow you to take extra burn, but what it does, or like you normally would, what it does is if you're casting thing like celerity, because I like air for that, and it's the only way that you can cast haste on your party, I can use battle burn to take that point of burn instead of taking it on myself and losing the HP. Battle burn also resets after 5 minutes of rest, so it's a good way to be able to keep something like celerity, haste, for your party up all the time. This does change a few other little things. You're going to get your expanded element at level 6, which I think is great. I mean, everyone else gets something at level 6 to add. You get your extra attacks and stuff. It's a big level for all of your melee combatants, your ranged combatants, a lot of them. And so I think it kind of sticks with that, and I don't think it's overpowered to do pretty much everything else. And then internal buffer. which internal buffer used to be, it allowed you to store burn. So what we would do is right before sleep, we would take 2 points of burn, put it into the buffer, and then after we rest and our burn reset, it would stay in the buffer. Now, the buffer refills after rest. So you start with this extra point. It allows you to mitigate a very small amount of burn, starting at 7, and it goes up to 2. So, I mean, it's not a lot, but it allows you to mitigate a very small amount of burn so that you can get those big explosions from. One of the big issues which you might not like is metakinesis. Metakinesis is basically like what you would use for your spellcasters. Well, in this one, Empower, half your dice, that's good. Well, metakinesis for level 9 is going to be persistent. It's going to allow you to deal with you casting spell-like utilities. It does not do what the original Kineticist does, which was maximize. You just maximize your damage for that spell, whether you crit it or not, just like your spell damage with your dice. So that's gone. You might see a little bit decrease with your damage with that if you like to use it. And then, of course, Quicken was still there. And then, of course, you've got your twice, which is double your blast and stuff like that. We won't even get into Omnikinesis. Those are some of the real biggest changes. And like I said, whenever you take the level 6 ability to get this, the other great change with this is you're no longer having to have that -4 that you used to have with the Kineticist for your second element. So I am now level 6. I pick water or whatever. Now I can pick something up to a 3rd level ability that I couldn't do previously. And it also gives you an extra +1 to attack and damage rolls if you go with straight 1 element, which is good. But I think this makes it a lot more balanced because you got the ability to have this extra element. Really, outside of covering your basic blast, it didn't do much. And it almost felt hurtful with it because this makes it so you can take all of those abilities. Otherwise, at level 6, you're kind of starting all the way back over, and you're not able to take anything utility-wise that is really worthwhile. Now, when it comes to archetypes, they have some really interesting archetypes that have come in this book. And I think, for the most part, they're pretty balanced. You have things like your Artistic Summoner. So you basically draw and use the gate ability from the Summoner, and you're shooting ink blasts or oil blasts at individuals, and then you're going to be using summon monsters. So I don't think it's overpowered. You get to keep some of your blasting ability while you're also able to create these other combatants on the field to help the rest of your party. Most of these are pretty good. Some of them not so much. But I haven't found too many of them that are overpowered. One of them I'm going to talk about later. And that is going to be down here, the Onslaught Blaster. It focuses very much on doing multiple blasts. So it takes your big blast and breaks it down so you can divide up. And I like to use the magnetic infusion to help my party out. So it allows me to deal less damage to multiple different targets while putting that infusion on so that when one target gets dropped for the rest of that round, they're going to be able to get that extra attack against the other individuals. But I'll go over some of these classes later if you want. Go ahead and leave a comment telling me which one you want to go over. I think I'm going to make one over an Onslaught Blaster because that's the one I'm trying to be able to use. And then, of course, it has the archetypes for the previous ones or what's core as well. You have elements which they've added, which some of them have some real interesting abilities. A lot of them are going to have alternative base kinesis abilities like you get, like aerokinesis that you would normally get. Light gives you basically mirror image. But I'm going to be sticking mostly with air because it's not going to be as much for my GM to read. She's newer with all this and she's never messed with the Kineticist. And of course, adding new elements, you're going to get your new saturations. And then of course, they add some composite blasts, not just for the mix of the new ones, but a little bit better for what was previously there. None of them for the main elements are going to be really overpowered. Like I said, I think there's some things in Visceral that most of your common power tables may not want, along with some of the others. And without making this too long, I'll just go over with your infusions. There's some interesting fusions that are in there, and the infusions, the utility talents and feats and items are probably some of the biggest things in this book. Quick look in going Nova, we can see things like elemental acceleration, which is going to increase your movement. It was added. And like I said, if you're looking at the class, there are some times where things like improved sterility is in there, which changes your base attack to full base attack. And he recommends probably not doing it or changing a little bit. And he has suggested fix for all these to try and tone a couple of them down. He does not have to make these notes very often. But I think that some of the extra utility provided, especially like for air, is going to just make the class a little bit cooler. And then once again, with Nova, we're looking at some of the feats. With this, and especially with your Legendary Kineticist, your extra wild talent is going to allow you to pick something of your level instead of, being multiple levels below what you're able to cast, especially with your secondary element and third. It just makes it so the class isn't hampered so much by it, and you get a little more playability. By the time you're getting to these levels, your arcane casters have already picked up. And as you progress into double digits, they're just going to be going Nova themselves. So giving a little more power and taking away some of the restrictions that I think wild talent or the extra wild talent feat really gave you, especially having a requirement originally for level 7 instead of like your rogue and slayer and pretty much everyone else who could do it from level 1. I think it's a good change that is in this book. Having these magical items that are given it, like the conduit glove, which allows you to use your hand, and this is a single glove, which you can use technically with other gloves or another set of magical gloves as well. But it allows you to treat this hand as being free when you gather power. I mean, originally you couldn't hold anything as a kineticist, so you always had to walk around with your hands free. And then, of course, if you had to hold on to something, you were just boned. And this, along with the Legendary Kineticist, really takes away a lot of the restrictions where a one-armed spellcaster could still take care of what they needed to do and get their business done. Another thing, and one of the main reasons that I love this book when you talk about adding it to a kineticist, and why I recommend grabbing this if you're trying to convince your GM to add extra material, is something like this Crystal of Elemental Knowledge. It can be a little pricey, but it's going to allow you to add a utility wild talent that you can use that maybe you couldn't get hold of without either removing one of your other ones. It's just not able to fit into your build. It allows you to have that flexibility, and it's limited because you can only have one of these until you take your expanded element. So it's not going to be broken. You can't have 15 or 20 of these. And it's a great item added. It's not overpowered, that gives the flexibility that the kineticist was missing. Now, there is a few of these which, like I said previously, Nova does recommend not using. And depending on the power level of your players, or if you've given them access to things from like spheres of powers, maybe you would or would not allow. But there are things like burn fragments, which take away part of that burn penalty, which, while we may like it because we feel that the class is too hampering, we're already getting a lot of utility with this book, with the new feats, with the changes that vastly improve our capabilities. If you're going Legendary Kineticist, you're going to end up with an extra wild talent, a couple extra infusions. And so you're rounding out and making the character feel a little less too focused. And this takes away the burn. And this is one of those things that your GM may not want to do because it takes away from one of the penalties. But I've already gone over what I wanted to do. That's my kind of quick cover and explanation and plea for you to add the Ultimate Kineticist Compendium to your game if you want to play a Kineticist. It helps us out, makes the class feel a little more fleshed out, and puts us an extra tier above so we don't lag behind in so many things. Like I said, Kineticist, you can, if you focus on it, can get that high damage, but it is not going to be continuous like a damage dealer was. I ran my character with a Slayer, and she was able to pull off tricks and get her to hide, and she dealt massively more damage than I was able to do. And hers was continuous every single round. It's a great class. See if you can get your GM to working on this. And I'm going to start doing a few archetypes from this. And I think I'm going to go through some Spheres of Power stuff too. So leave comments on what you want to see either in this book, some archetypes you want to see in this book, or anything from Spheres of Power. I'm going to go through some of the magic section on it because I like it. It's a change of the systems. And I used to do some custom stuff back in the old 3.0 days. But anyway, enjoy your game this week and good luck on those rolls.